The knives struck in silence first. Not the silence of peace, but the stunned silence of disbelief. One moment, the most powerful man in Rome stood among senators beneath the marble ceiling of the Senate House. The next moment, blades flashed in the air, robes tore, and the ruler of the Roman world collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Blood spread across the marble as the conspirators stepped back, breathing heavily, staring at what they had just done. They had killed Julius Caesar. But what happened next is far more terrifying than the assassination itself, because the men who believed they had saved the Roman Republic would soon discover a brutal truth. Killing Caesar did not save Rome. It doomed them, and one by one, the conspirators would face consequences more horrific than they ever imagined. To understand why, we must travel back to the final years of the Roman Republic, when Rome stood at the height of its power, and at the edge of collapse. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had transformed from a small city-state into a vast empire stretching across the Mediterranean. Its armies had conquered Greece, North Africa, Spain, and parts of Asia Minor. Wealth flowed into the city from distant provinces. Victorious generals returned with treasure, slaves, and glory. But beneath the surface of success, the Republic was cracking. Powerful families competed ruthlessly for influence. Elections were often corrupted by bribery and intimidation. The Senate struggled to control ambitious military leaders who commanded loyal armies. Among these rising figures was a man whose name would change history forever. Julius Caesar was not born a king. He came from an old but relatively modest aristocratic family. From an early age he displayed extraordinary ambition, charisma, and political intelligence. He also understood something many senators refused to accept. The Roman Republic was no longer stable. Through alliances, military victories, and calculated risks, Caesar climbed the ladder of power. He formed a political partnership known as the First Triumvirate with two other powerful men, Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together, they dominated Roman politics, but alliances in Rome rarely lasted forever. After Crassus died during a disastrous campaign in the east, tensions between Caesar and Pompey exploded. The Senate, fearing Caesar's growing influence, ordered him to surrender his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar refused. Instead, he made a decision that would ignite a civil war and transform the future of Rome. In 49 BCE, Caesar marched his army across the Rubicon River. Roman law forbade generals from bringing armies into Italy. Crossing the Rubicon meant rebellion. According to legend, Caesar paused at the river's edge before uttering the famous words, "The die is cast." Then his legions advanced. Civil war erupted across the Roman world. Armies clashed in Greece, Egypt, Africa, and Spain. Pompey and his allies fought desperately to stop Caesar's rise. But Caesar was a brilliant commander. One by one, his enemies fell. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated by local officials hoping to win Caesar's favor. Instead, Caesar reportedly wept when he saw the severed head of his former ally. Victory followed victory. By 45 BCE, Caesar had defeated the last major resistance to his rule. Rome now stood under the control of a single man, and that terrified the Senate. For centuries, the Roman Republic had been built on a principle: no king would ever rule Rome again. The memory of the ancient Roman monarchy, overthrown nearly 500 years earlier, still haunted the political imagination of the city. Yet Caesar's power was beginning to look very much like a monarchy. He was declared dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life. Statues of him appeared throughout the city. His face was stamped on Roman coins. Some supporters even suggested granting him a crown. To Caesar's allies, these honors recognized his achievements. To many senators, they were signs of tyranny. Among the worried senators were two men whose names would become forever linked with betrayal: Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Both were respected figures in Roman politics. Both had fought in earlier conflicts against Caesar before eventually accepting his authority. But neither man fully trusted him. Cassius, in particular, feared that Rome's ancient freedoms were disappearing. He began quietly speaking with other senators who shared his concerns. Whispers spread through the Senate halls. Could Caesar become king? Would the Republic survive? Or was Rome sliding toward dictatorship? The conspiracy slowly formed in secret meetings and whispered conversations. Eventually, more than 60 senators joined the plot. Their goal was simple: kill Caesar, restore the Republic. But even among the conspirators, doubts remained. Assassinating the most powerful man in Rome was not just dangerous, it was unprecedented. Yet the conspirators convinced themselves that history would celebrate them as heroes. They believed they were saving Rome. Everything was about to change. The chosen day was March 15, 44 BCE. In the Roman calendar, this day was known as the Ides of March. Strangely, warnings had appeared beforehand. A soothsayer reportedly approached Caesar days earlier and delivered a cryptic message. Beware the Ides of March. Caesar dismissed the warning. Even on the morning of the assassination, strange events unfolded. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, reportedly dreamed of his death and begged him not to attend the Senate meeting that day. For a moment, Caesar hesitated, but political pressure was immense. Senators were expecting him. Important decisions awaited discussion. So Caesar left his house and walked toward the Senate meeting, unaware that dozens of men around him carried hidden daggers beneath their robes. Inside the Senate chamber, the conspirators gathered around him. One by one, they closed in. Then the attack began. The first blow struck from behind. Another followed, then another. Caesar tried to defend himself, but he was surrounded. Ancient sources claim he received 23 stab wounds before collapsing. And according to legend, when he saw Brutus among the attackers, he spoke the words that would echo through history. Eat to, brute. Then he fell. The conspirators stepped back. They believed they had saved Rome. But outside the Senate walls, the city was descending into chaos. Citizens fled in panic. Shops closed. Streets emptied. Rumors raced through the population. The most powerful man in Rome had just been murdered. And the assassins had no plan for what came next. They expected the Senate to praise them. They expected the people to celebrate. Instead, Rome reacted with shock. Because the truth was something the conspirators had failed to understand. Caesar had been popular. He had passed reforms that helped the poor. He had rewarded soldiers with land. He had forgiven many former enemies after the civil war. To the ordinary citizens of Rome, Caesar was not a tyrant, he was a hero. And when news of his death spread, anger began to grow. The conspirators soon realized something terrifying. They had not saved the Republic. They had started another civil war. But the worst part of their fate was still coming, because Caesar had left behind powerful allies who were determined to avenge him. One of them was a young man few senators initially took seriously. His name was Octavian. He was only 19 years old when Caesar died, but Caesar had secretly adopted him as his son and heir, and that decision would alter history forever. Another ally was the brilliant general Mark Antony. Antony had served as Caesar's trusted lieutenant during the civil wars. He was charismatic, ambitious, and deeply loyal to Caesar's legacy. At first, the conspirators tried to negotiate with Antony. They hoped to avoid further bloodshed. But Antony had other plans. During Caesar's funeral, he delivered a speech that would ignite the fury of the Roman people. Standing before the massive crowd gathered in the forum, Antony described Caesar's achievements, his generosity, and the betrayal he had suffered. Then he displayed Caesar's blood-stained robe. The crowd erupted in rage. The funeral turned into a riot. Citizens stormed the streets looking for the assassins. Suddenly, the conspirators were no longer heroes. They were fugitives. Brutus, Cassius, and their allies fled the city, escaping to the eastern provinces of the Roman world. They still hoped to gather armies and defend the Republic, but the political landscape had changed dramatically. Back in Rome, Antony and Octavian formed an uneasy alliance with another powerful politician, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Together, they created the Second Triumvirate, and their mission was clear: hunt down Caesar's killers. But the way they did it would plunge Rome into one of the darkest chapters of its history, because the triumvirs introduced a terrifying policy known as proscriptions. Lists of enemies were posted publicly in the city. Anyone whose name appeared on the list could be killed without trial. Their property would be confiscated, their families ruined. Soon Rome became a city of fear. Citizens whispered in dark corners, terrified their names might appear on the next list. And at the top of the triumvir's enemies were the men who had killed Caesar: Brutus, Cassius, and dozens of other conspirators scattered across the Roman world. The hunt had begun, and the fate waiting for them would be far more horrific than they ever imagined. The city of Rome had become a place where whispers meant survival and silence meant fear. Every street corner held rumors, every gathering carried tension, and every Roman citizen knew that the Republic they once believed eternal was slipping away. But far from the city, across the eastern provinces of the Mediterranean, the men who had plunged their knives into the body of Julius Caesar were desperately trying to prepare for the storm they knew was coming. Among them stood two of the most important conspirators, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. They had escaped Rome before the fury of the crowd could reach them. At first, they believed they still had a chance to restore the Republic. After all, they were not powerless fugitives. Both men were experienced commanders with loyal supporters among Rome's eastern territories. The provinces of Greece and Asia Minor became their refuge. But refuge was not enough. They needed armies. Cassius moved quickly. He traveled through Syria and the surrounding regions, gathering troops, money, and ships. His reputation as a capable general helped him convince many Roman governors and soldiers to join his cause. Meanwhile, Brutus marched through Greece, raising legions and securing alliances with local leaders who still feared the growing power of Caesar's supporters. Within a year, the conspirators had assembled a massive military force, nearly 20 legions, thousands of cavalry, warships controlling vital sea roads. For a moment, it seemed possible that the assassins might actually win. But back in Italy, the men determined to avenge Caesar were preparing just as relentlessly. The alliance between Octavian and Mark Antony had solidified into something far more dangerous than the conspirators anticipated. Together with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, they controlled the western half of the Roman world. And they had unleashed terror in Rome itself. The proscription spread across the city like a plague. Lists of condemned enemies appeared on public boards. Anyone whose name was written there became a target for death. Informers and bounty hunters roamed the streets. Neighbors betrayed neighbors. Friends turned against friends. The goal was simple: destroy every enemy of the triumvirs. One of the most famous victims of this purge was the great Roman orator Cicero. Cicero had once been one of Rome's most respected voices, a defender of the Republic and a fierce critic of Mark Antony. His words had made him powerful. But in the violent politics of Rome, words could also become fatal. When his name appeared on the proscription lists, Cicero tried to flee the city. According to ancient historians, he was captured while attempting to escape by sea. Soldiers dragged him from his litter and executed him beside the road. His head and hands were then taken back to Rome and displayed in the Forum. It was a warning to anyone who dared oppose the triumvirs. But even this brutality was only preparation for the war that was now inevitable, because the assassins still commanded powerful armies in the east, and sooner or later the two sides would meet. Everything was about to change. In the autumn of 42 BCE, the forces of the triumvirs crossed the Adriatic Sea and marched into Greece. Their armies were enormous, tens of thousands of hardened Roman soldiers who had already fought in years of civil war. Their destination was a small city in northern Greece, Philippi. It was here that the fate of Caesar's assassins would be decided. Brutus and Cassius had chosen their position carefully. Their army occupied strong defensive ground near the city, with marshes on one side and hills on the other. Their fleets controlled the sea routes, threatening the supply lines of the triumvirs. For weeks the two armies stared at each other across the battlefield. Each side waited, each side prepared. The tension grew heavier with every passing day. Thousands of soldiers camped beneath the open sky, sharpening weapons, repairing armor, and wondering how the coming battle would unfold. Roman soldiers knew civil wars were the most dangerous of all conflicts, because the enemy was not foreign. The enemy was Roman, and somewhere across the field stood men who had once been allies, comrades, even friends. Finally, the waiting ended. The first battle of Philippi erupted in chaos. Antony launched an aggressive attack against Cassius's forces. The fighting was brutal and confused. Dust filled the air. Soldiers clashed with shields and swords. Orders were shouted across the battlefield as commanders struggled to control the chaos. In one part of the field, Brutus achieved a surprising victory. His troops overwhelmed Octavian's legions, capturing their camp and forcing them to retreat. But on another section of the battlefield, Cassius was losing. Antony's forces pushed forward relentlessly, breaking through defensive lines and capturing Cassius's position. Communication between the two wings of the army collapsed. The battlefield became a maze of confusion and conflicting rumors. And then a tragic mistake sealed Cassius's fate. Believing that Brutus had been defeated, and that the entire battle was lost, Cassius made a decision that would echo through history. Rather than face capture, he chose death. He ordered one of his own servants to help him commit suicide. The man who had helped plan the assassination of Caesar now lay dead on the battlefield of Philippi, not killed by his enemies but by his own hand. But the war was not over. Brutus was still alive, and his army still stood strong. For nearly 3 weeks after the first battle, the two sides reorganized and prepared for another confrontation. Brutus attempted to maintain discipline among his troops, but the situation was becoming increasingly unstable. Supplies were running low. Morale was weakening. Meanwhile, Antony and Octavian prepared for a final assault. Then the Second Battle of Philippi began. This time, the outcome was decisive. Antony's forces launched a coordinated attack that shattered Brutus's defenses. His soldiers fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by the combined strength of the triumvir's armies. The line collapsed. The battlefield turned into chaos. Roman soldiers fled into the hills as enemy troops closed in from every direction. Brutus retreated with a small group of loyal followers. They escaped into the nearby mountains, hoping to regroup or perhaps find a way to escape the advancing forces. But deep down, Brutus understood the truth. The Republic was finished. The dream he and the other conspirators had believed in was gone. That night, beneath the darkness of the Macedonian hills, Brutus gathered his closest companions. According to ancient historians, he spoke calmly about the fate of Rome and the choices he had made. He believed that killing Caesar had been necessary, even if it had ultimately failed. But he also understood that capture would mean humiliation and execution. So like Cassius before him, Brutus chose the only escape he believed remained. He committed suicide. The man who had once been celebrated as the defender of the Republic now lay dead, far from Rome, surrounded by the ruins of a defeated army. When news reached Mark Antony, he reportedly ordered that Brutus be buried with honor, recognizing the courage of a defeated enemy. But the rest of the conspirators would not receive such respect. Many were hunted down and executed in the months that followed. Others took their own lives rather than face capture. The men who had believed they were saving Rome were now scattered across the Mediterranean, dead, disgraced, or fleeing into exile. The assassination of Caesar had not restored the Republic. It had destroyed it, and in the aftermath of Philippi, the Roman world would begin transforming into something entirely new. Because the alliance between Octavian and Mark Antony would not last forever. Soon, another civil war would erupt, a war that would end with a single man ruling the Roman world. The age of emperors was approaching, but the story of Caesar's assassins remained as a haunting lesson in the dangers of political ambition and miscalculation. They had struck down the most powerful man in Rome, believing themselves to be liberators. Yet their victory lasted only minutes. Their punishment lasted the rest of their lives, and their actions would reshape the course of history forever.